And on a rainy November day, a couple of days before Thanksgiving 2005, we arrived back at 120 Salmon River Road with a bloated toe. Maybe three bloated toes,
Yeah,
who knows? Larry Gooley, Jill McKee, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Good.
We haven't sat here at this chair for, what, a couple of years?
No, just about a year. Almost
Just
exactly.
about a year?
Yep.
And I have to tell you, the response to our interview was tremendous for me. I don't know what it was like for you. We were talking about this book, and it has to do with Lion Mountain mining. Well researched, lots of pictures, lots of fun, and lots of time and energy to put it together. And now, after a year, tell me how has it gone?
Well, it did very well. We've focused locally. We've done very well in Lion Mountain, even though it has a small population. Families that have left have been in touch. And we've sold out the first printing, and we did a second printing.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
First printing is what, 1,000
Yeah.
generally?
Yeah, we did. That's what we did. And that sold out. And we did a second printing, which we've distributed around the North Country now.
Well, you know, when you self-publish, when you do a local book, and you said you've done local things for local people, and you sell 1,000, that's a nice milestone, right, Jill?
Yes. Yes, it is.
A woman of a few words. We'll get it open up a little bit before we finish
early.
here. But it is a good thing. And the response I got was, oh, that's my grandfather, that's my Uncle Charlie, that's my so-and-so. So people, and did you get any new pictures out of it?
Any new?
Any photographs of mining that you hadn't had before? Did you get anything like that out of it?
You mean for that book?
No,
Or
after.
After that? There was, there's a woman that's from Lion Mountain. She's down in Troy, and these pictures have kind of reached me in a roundabout way. But there were some that, actually, I probably would have used a few of them. The donkeys that they had, for one. They have pictures of them actually lowering them into the mines.
Do they really?
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I think people that are interested, what we've done since this book came out, Jill created a website dedicated to Lion Mountain. They're helping us with sales, but we're helping them raise money for their mining and railroad museum. And we've raised quite a bit of money, and they sell calendars, and I believe they put the donkeys on one of the new calendars that are out.
What's the
Yes.
website?
It's a subdomain of our main website, so it's called lionmountain.bloatedtoe.com.
That's easy to know, but
Yeah.
everybody's interested in that, and I'll check it out the moment I get home. Everybody's got a website now, and
Yeah.
it's so easy to put one up and to add to it, and I just enjoy that. So will there be a chapter 2 to the Lion Mountain book or not?
Well, there is a chapter in this book dedicated to the deaths in the mines, and in that I used the interviews, which I thought were very effective. They were very touching when I did them. But I thought that was the most important subject, so I wanted to expand on that, and the plan was to do a book just on the deaths, and that's what I produced this year. And-
Oh, so you do have
yes.
an addendum. I knew we came here besides just to get a cup of coffee. And this one is called Out of the Darkness and Memory of Lion Mountain Iron Men. This is a real gravestone? Did you take this picture?
I took the picture, and then with our software, he manipulated it to make it look like that was engraved on there.
Isn't that neat? Now wait a minute, this book looks even a little bit thicker than the other book.
Yeah, well, in the first book, as there usually is, a lot of material that you just can't include because your book would be huge. So it is what it is, but there is some history. There's additional history in this book, especially relating Lion Mountain's role to world events. Then there's a section that describes how people died, the various accidents from the different stages of mining, and then some like vital statistics, almost like a trivia section, but it's nothing trivial about it. It is dealing with deaths and injuries.
Yeah.
But then the main portion of the book deals with, there's 162 men who died in mining accidents. And what I tried to do, knowing I couldn't do it for every single man, for each man the goal was to get a picture of the man, a picture of his gravestone, a brief biography of him, including a little bit of family information and the type of accident that he died in, and the years that he served and things like that. And then the newspaper article that appeared at the time of his death. Now, for a lot of the men, like in the 1870s, 1890s, there are no photographs. And after a while, you begin to realize that no matter what quality the photograph was, you were lucky to find it. So we have some in there that might be blurry, that you really can't improve on the blurred photos, but it's the only representation of the man that the family has. So that's what's in there.
Putting any book together is time consuming, and when you try to make it historical, then it's even more so, because you have to deal with genealogy. You got to deal with individuals who might or might not be alive, family members that might be here, and then you have to go really do some serious scrounging.
Yes,
So out of 160, how many? 162?
162.
Were you able to find something about all of them?
Yes, something at least an article somewhere that described a little bit of what happened. The hardest part, as you mentioned, was the genealogy. At one point I believed that it was a terrible mistake to try to include that, because a lot of people,
Hindsight is 2020. Remember that.
what was your grandfather's or your dad's middle name? Oh, I have no idea. What did he do in the mines? Do you have any photos? No. And a nice offshoot of that is some people have come up with photos for other people's families that they didn't have a picture of their grandfather or their father. And other people I was in touch with did, and now they do. They've had copies made.
This, who wrote the piece on the back here?
He did.
Guilty.
He's the
Did you
writer.
really?
Yeah.
He's
This
the writer.
is-
I mainly the technical consultant.
You're getting better and better, you know.
Well,
I
this-
just, with your permission, I'm able to scan things very quickly, and I read this while you were talking. It's written extremely well. If the rest of the book is as good as the back,
It's a different type of writing, though.
no,
You know?
this is dramatic. It's poignant. It's artful, and I like it. Out of the darkness shine. It sounds like it sounds like the Lone Ranger. Out of the darkness shines a light on the identities of the men who died in the iron mines of Lion Mountain, New York. The last line, the last sentence is nice. These were real iron men, the true heroes of American industry. You're preserving. First of all, you're a guy with a mission. He gets all excited just thinking about these things, and you're not that I would put you in the same category with me, because I'm rather pathetic in being as organized as both of you are. But you just get going on something, and you develop a passion, and you can't stop. It's like you're ordained
Well, it's like
to
an
do
obsession.
this project.
Right,
It becomes an obsession.
Right, because you don't want to get anything wrong, and you
That's
realize
the hard part when you're dealing with facts. I don't deal very well with facts
Well,
because I embellish things, you know.
trying to get names in there. When you look at it, you'll see that it might say the name was Kovalowski, and then I'll give also known as, and there might be some of them have 11 variations, and I
True.
tried to get the correct name or the most used name, but when I went through the town death records, for instance, one woman signed it twice for a family member that died. She signed her name differently. So I thought her name was the first one, which is one I was looking for. She signed it differently at the bottom. So determining people's real names was difficult enough, and then trying to find out what job they did. And the search ends up going to newspapers in Messina and Ogdensburg and everywhere else, because some deaths just weren't reported here.
Why, just before we really get into the meat and potatoes of this book, let us pause for a moment, make sure everything is cool where we are, and then we'll continue this discussion. And my next question will be, why is it important to write a book like this? Stay with us. You know, I've always said that we should have a second cameraman. This is not a very high-tech show. We should have a second camera always going and make special shows out of what we talk about between times, because it's always very interesting. We just spent the last 10 minutes solving all the problems in the world and talking about lots of things that we aren't going to mention on camera. But we're back to talk about these books with Larry Gooley and Jill. Why is it important to write books like this? Why do you feel as though, I mean, you said you had an obsession with these mining books. Why is it important to do this?
Well, it's part of our history. First of all, it's where we came from. You know, my relatives came from Ireland and from different places, and a lot of these people are somewhat removed from where their families came from. So I did research on that, and you know, they built the country. These people died building the country, and you know, it struck me that growing up in Champlain, my dad worked at Sheridan, which became Harris, and you know, your dad just went to work every day. You pretty much expected your dad to come home every day. And in Line Mountain, it was just a fact of life that a lot of dads didn't come home. You know, I mean, eventually, children of different ages, but 350 children lost a dad in the mine. Some dads had 10 or more children.
That puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yes.
Wow.
It's your, you know, everyday life for them was, well, this year we know at least 3 dads are probably not coming home. And, you know, we didn't face that when I grew up. It was just a job. You know, it was fairly safe. I mean, accidents happen, but it was fairly safe.
I'm sure there are people viewing this program who have no idea how dangerous a business that was. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are people watching this program who may or may not have seen our first one who don't even know that mining was a way of life
Right.
in Lion Mountain. So that's what we hope to talk a little bit more about today, especially as it applies to these. These are real people. This is not something that's detached. You've now brought it right down to earth. How many people died? How many widows were left behind? How many other family members, not to mention children, right?
Right. I
Who were left behind.
Yeah. I remember some of the statistics from it. I think there were at least 11 women who were pregnant when their husbands were killed, and some were just a week or 2 pregnant. And you know, and some of those had many children already. So, and then of course, the way it worked in Line Mountain was if there's not an active miner living in the house, it's time for you to leave.
Yeah, the company wasn't very kind. They would just kick you right out of your house. And,
Yeah, it's something we've talked a lot about before. Tell me a little bit more about that.
well, like one woman we spoke to, these 2 sisters who lost their father, I think they were just very little children when their father died, and if their mother hadn't been able to move in with her parents, they would have just had to leave town. They had no place to go. The company kicked them out of their house because their father had died, and they were no longer entitled to a company home, and they had nothing. And there were several families, they didn't have anyone they could live with, so they pretty much just had to leave town and try to find their way somewhere else.
People who haven't been brought up with the company have no idea what we're talking about. We made a reference to Tennessee Ernie Ford and 16 tons, and what do you get? It's the company store. The company owned the joint. The company
ran
owned everything. They
Everything.
owned your house. They owned your life.
Yeah.
They gave you even script, didn't they? Did they have script in Lion Mountain too?
Originally they did, yes.
Originally in script.
Yes.
So you didn't even, you spent their money.
Their money and their store and their
And their
prices.
store and their
And they wouldn't
prices.
even allow other business. Didn't one woman run a store and they basically kicked her out? They wouldn't let anyone come in to compete with them either.
You can understand that. Got a monopoly in the business.
That's right.
Mining is still done. All kinds of mining is done in our country. And even though it's still dangerous, it's dangerous anytime you're underground doing things, even with modern equipment, because things can go wrong. But in those days, safety wasn't always the issue, was it?
No, unfortunately. Well, you know, I point out in there that 162 men died in the mines, in mining accidents. There were thousands and thousands of other accidents. The company didn't take responsibility for any of them. And the closest they came, actually, that I believe was the first one. The very first accident that I found that included a fatality, the foreman was in charge of setting off dynamite. And in this case, he didn't warn his coworkers like he should have, and one of them was killed by flying debris, and the foreman was fired. But that's all the accidents that I found. It was the employee's fault. Usually, the headlines will tell you that too. You know.
Isn't that
Employee was
amazing?
breaking the
They,
rules.
they even manipulated the stories,
Oh,
the
yeah.
media.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of times there's a man who was in charge of the mines in the early 1900s, Cartwright. He manipulated the stories too, because his feeling was if somebody died in the mines, it made him look bad. So he would slant the story or try to cover the story at first completely. That made it harder to find some of these. Because I found one in one newspaper report in It's from some newspaper, maybe in Ogdensburg or somewhere, where he issued a denial about a story that had appeared about an accident. So, wow, I said, well, here's one I haven't seen. So now I have to go back to Plattsburgh and search, where can I find this? And eventually I did find it. I found the original story, and he had pretty much squashed it, but he hadn't been in town when it happened. And it was a horrible accident. That's what made it worse. It was the case where a man was working on the elevator. The lift that took the men up would go to the bottom of the mine, and at different levels, it would stop to pick up different people. Something was wrong at the bottom, and he was sent to work on it, and he was down, lying on the platform, stretched out across it with his head over the edge. And there's different people above him on the levels, and somebody gave the signal to raise the elevator. And
Oh man, you just made my stomach do a
Well,
backflip.
but you know, that's one thing people should know. It is graphic. The stories, the newspaper describes it.
Well, you know
as-
what? You can't gloss it over.
No, I mean, when they describe it, they tell you that his head was cut off, and when the elevator got to the top, there were men waiting to get on, and there was his body, and his head was found down at the bottom. And
The
then-
newspapers were much more graphic back
Oh,
then too. Even the
very much
obituaries, they wouldn't just say someone died peacefully at home. If they shot themselves in the head, they would just go right ahead and say that.
You know,
in the
that's a
newspaper.
study that I've done, many people before me, about how journalism has changed over the years. And I've watched it, of course, because I was in the business for a long, long time. And newspapers especially, in the 1800s, very, very interesting compared to the way newspapers
Yeah.
are put together today. The stories were very, very different. And obituaries. That's a that's a
Well-
perfect example. And you collected a lot of them,
Yeah.
didn't you?
I mean, it was colorful writing, but you know how it is. You have to weed out. Some people are going to embellish, but they also wanted to tell the graphic details back then. And the headlines. You know, no regard for the family. Man's head crushed. You know, you really don't want to read that about your dad. But those headlines are in there because I took them directly from the newspaper and then reproduced the articles.
Yeah, I think it's important during the course of this program to mention a few of the names because some of these people have descendants who are still alive, and they've talked to you and others. Which ones of these stories were stood out particularly in your mind? Anybody, right off the bat, Jill?
I think the story of Ray Ducharme and we had his son who lives in Lion Mountain, and it actually turned out that one of his son's wives was my school teacher down in Whitehall, which was rather coincidental. But he died, I think, right around Thanksgiving, and that was one accident. They were never really able to explain what exactly went wrong. They died in an explosion, and they investigated the accident, and they really couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. But like their youngest son was only 18 months old, he really never even knew his father. And part of the reason it stands out is because the accident is also mentioned in the first book. And we went up to Lion Mountain for a Legion dinner shortly after this book came out, and he actually came up to us and said that he really liked the book, but it was really painful to read about his dad's accident. I guess he'd never really known the details of his father's accident until he saw it in that book. So that one really stands out.
But when a tragedy like that happens in your family and you were very young, you do spend most of your life trying to get details. Even though, you know, the details are sordid and sometimes even ghoulish, you want to know.
I've been hearing that a lot. I didn't know. I didn't know that's how it happened. You know, he was very nice too. I would have been bothered too, you know, if I
Yeah.
found out, well, that's exactly how my father died. In fact, what Jill mentioned, that accident was investigated by the national experts. They brought in the country's best. And I'm glad I kept searching because about 3 or 4 weeks later, the articles appear that, and I reproduced them in there, that they don't know. J.R. Linney said the same thing, we're at a total loss. We cannot explain how that could explode. Oh, and I had an email contact. I contacted many people, and this one woman had mentioned her grandfather and a couple of other relatives who had worked in the mines. Well, reading through the articles, I'm so glad this clicked with me. When I saw the name, I said, all right, I know it from somewhere. Well, eventually I tracked it down to her. And when this accident happened, one of the keys was they were raising the dynamite, and a man up above said he yelled for them to go ahead and raise it, and within a few seconds, everything just exploded. Now, he would have been killed except that the shaft was open above him, so the explosion had a place to go. But I can't recall for sure, was he...
Was he the one who was deafened?
Deaf, yeah, he was deafened for life by the explosion. And That was the Ray Ducharme accident, where,
Or was?
and it was her, I believe it was her grandfather who was the man just up above.
There
'Cause
were,
she had told
there were
me,
two other men killed, right? There were 3 men killed in that accident.
she had told me
that
that
day.
he was deafened for life and had to leave his job, and he ran a farm, I think, on the Plank Road. And then I just recalled that he had been deafened, and then I connected the two, and it turns out his name was in the article. It was actually there. So there was a first-hand connection. I mentioned that to Ray Ducharme.
So you have brought a lot of these details to
Joe Ducharme. excuse
Joe
me.
Ducharme?
Yeah.
Joe Ducharme is the son that we met up in
Yes.
Lyman.
You brought a lot of these stories together that people weren't aware of. That's what reporters do, and you are, in a sense, a reporter. You're certainly a journalist. Were you able to find every gravestone?
No, in most of the cemeteries, yes, but St. Bernard Cemetery, long ago they did something that they never should have done, but stones were removed, and it's strange how it was done. I didn't see it before, so I can't say how it was, but there's one section where there are a lot of miners who died in accidents, and then chronologically the next group is missing. There's hardly any. I found every one that I could, and I did find the church records that the men were buried there, but there are no headstones. In most cases, though, outside of Line Mountain, I could find them. I think there were 20 or so that are missing. And others, there was no gravestone. It'll sometimes say buried in Potter's Field, which, that was common back then. If the guy just came over from Hungary, nobody knows who he is. There's just so many unusual statistics. There's a man was there 38 years, and he was killed in an accident, and that is really unusual. The old timers were the guys that didn't have that happen. There were some, but 38 was the longest. And then there was another man, just unbelievable. He arrived, he came over from Germany. He worked in the morning, and he was out for lunch down in the mines, and he stepped off, and that was it. He worked 4 hours, and he died in the mines. And there were several that died in the first week and the first month. But
Pathos, tragedy, just awful.
yeah, it's hard to understand how people. Oh, there's a familiar name. Hard to understand how people dealt with it.
I just happened to open it.
No, this one here. This is Thomas Kowalski, and there are 2 Thomas Kowalskis that died in mines. There's one in 1919, I believe, and this is his son here, and that would be the uncle, right? This has been a while, but it's connected to the famous baseball Kowalskis in Line Mountain.
That's what I thought.
Yes, he's the uncle
Yes.
of Tommy Kowalski up
Yeah.
Line Mountain.
This one here.
These are amazing stories.
I think they are.
The oldest death that you could find occurred when?
The earliest,
Earliest.
was 1878. That was the one where the foreman was fired. I believe the man's name, that one stands, Calvin Manley, I think was the name. And but there's very, very few details. Not long after that, there was a man killed further down the road, but it wasn't actually mining. They were using mining equipment. They were using the dynamite to work a road, and he was killed there. But I tried to stick to the ones that were killed in mining accidents. If it was in the woods logging, I didn't include it. But if it was something, say, with timbers in the mines, I did. There was another thing that stood out to me too. Well, with the wonders of computers, this offered something new. I took statistics from town records, village, church records, and it took forever to put them in a spreadsheet, but make them completely sortable. So instead of putting the date, you want to break it up into the year and the month and the day. So you might put 9 in one, February in the next, and then the year. So you end up with a huge number of columns, and I think I had like 40-something thousand entries. But then,
Dear God.
but then when you sort it, certain things start to stand out. And I noticed there's a job called bell ringer, and I'm thinking, a bell ringer, and then when I accumulated it, there were quite a few bell ringers that died in the mines. Well, when I found out what it was, then you can understand why they died so often. But then at a certain point, it stopped. So I said, why would this be? So you have to keep looking, and then you find out. The bell ringers, especially in the early days, it would be open pit mines, and you're all working down on the bottom, and this might be anywhere from 50 to 150 feet deep. Sort of like looking off the edge of the Gulf. You're looking that far down, and the men are down there working, and when the car is loaded, it's a tram that's on an angle, like maybe 40, 45 degrees or even steeper, and He'll ring the bell when everything's loaded, everything's secured, it's time to raise it, and they start to raise it. And I know earlier they did it with horses up above. They would have a team of horses pull and drag it up. And then they had powered whimsies from different types of power to do it. So this guy on the bottom would ring the bell, it's time to go up. Well, he's there at the bottom, and when that thing makes it a third of the way up and the cable breaks or something happens, it just comes plummeting down at tremendous speed. It's loaded with iron ore, and when it hits, whoever's there is dead. But usually you've moved out of the way, but the flying debris was like bullets everywhere. And there were 7 or 8 bell ringers killed like that, and some were just scrambling to get away and got hit by the car itself. Their legs are severed, all kinds of things. There were a lot of amputations on those jobs. And then I noticed around 1916 or 17, the bell ringer category on my spreadsheet is empty. There's nothing. What happened to these guys? Well, that's when they started to gear themselves towards underground mining. And in the early 20s, they developed the underground mining, and there were no more bell ringers getting killed like that. But there was a whole new category then.
No, so we're talking about 1800s all the way up to 66, where maybe the last one?
Yeah, 67 the mines closed, and the last one was 66.
So it's over a long period
Yes.
of time. As we mentioned earlier, you folks felt compelled to tell these stories, and are they all told now in these books, or are there more?
Well, I think there are more. I think there are some that died anonymously that we just won't know about. And the way records are supposed to be, if you died in Champlain, your death is supposed to be recorded in Champlain. But it wasn't always done that way. First of all, they weren't always recorded. Depending on who you were, it probably wasn't recorded. If you were a foreigner who just got here, there was probably no record except someone mentioned. Well, actually, there are some in there, I think, that just say the Polish guy that was killed 2 days ago was buried yesterday. And that's it.
No kidding.
And you need to search the death records to find out was there at least a listing, maybe the church especially. So you can at least find the name, but there's nothing else. And I just think it's terrible that people aren't remembered for what they did. And you know how it is when you walk through a cemetery. There's a story in every stone, but we don't know those stories.
Well, there's a lot of emotion. I think we've begun to express that in our discussion. There's a lot of emotion within these pages.
Oh, yeah.
Where you talk to surviving family members or even read one of these obituaries. Like you told that one story about the man who was decapitated, and my stomach did 17 backflips. You can imagine the pathos and horror involved with the families. Has nobody else told this story before? Are you the first to put all of this stuff together?
Yes. Yes, the church in Line Mountain did a book that included material from a report by J.R. Linney. J.R. Linney used to run the mines. And in 1934, he did a report, which is actually in book form. And the church drew from that. But that material you can find in the newspapers, say in 1980. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these. People would take a tour of the operations in Chazy, the quarrying, or they would go to Line Mountain. So they write a very extensive article describing in depth all the operations. And much of what's in Linney's book describing it comes from the original information. A lot of what I dug up, just besides asking families, involved reading over 100 years of newspapers, and then you have to read each newspaper. You can't just read one, because for some period of time, like in the early 1900s, well, when that Cartwright man took over, he would squelch the stories, and it was very hard to get information. But there were miners from Champlain, and they would tell the stories in Champlain, and the Champlain newspaper ran them. And that was the only source. Once I had a date, I went back to the Plattsburgh papers. There's no record of several of them. It was the Champlain Counselor or some of those. And it's a hard thing to do when you're really interested in deaths, and you don't want these people to be forgotten, but you have to ask a family about their deceased family members. And there are some of these that are, the children are still here. I've spoken with them. They offered photos, and there was a nice connection between two women, Ethel Rushford and I think it's Marie Garrow, because the two men, that's one of the best known accidents in Line Mountain. The two men were killed. They were working partners, while they were also good friends, and they lived across the road from each other. And one of the men was Donald Lord, and my source was the phone book. I couldn't find anything. I found a guy named Donald Lord, so I called him. And he sounded a little iffy at first, but then he explained that it was a relative of his, and then he told me when he knew what I was doing, he told me a few family members who might have some information. The third family member that I tried was Donald Lord's daughter. And then she connected me with
It's amazing where
Garrow's
you have to go
daughter.
to get to the
So
information.
actually, we do have them side by side in the book with photos and the whole story.
You know, I forgot to ask, how did you first, I mean, you're not from Lion Mountain. How did you first get involved in this? Why did you decide I have to tell this Lion Mountain story? We mentioned that last time, but I want to mention it again in connection with this show.
Well, I'm sure part of it, I'm not sure I mentioned this part of it earlier, was when I researched the Altona Flat Rock book, you also, you know, you're reading a lot of newspapers, you see a lot of information. I would see a lot of Lion Mountain stories. I was very curious, and I was always interested in Lion Mountain baseball. So, and the mines. I didn't know hardly anything about the mines, and I wanted to. So I started to ask a lot of questions, and I did, you know, the first book is based on the interviews largely from 1980 and 81, which is, you know, what writer wouldn't want to have that at their disposal? This information's 24 years old. As I mentioned, Jerry Blanche is the sole surviving member of the group that I interviewed. And, you know, but I'd met several of the children of people that I interviewed. And some of them very close to their parents, but didn't know we had done the interviews, actually. We're pretty interested to read about Dad and Mom. I should mention, the two most important people to us as far as getting the story told were Rita Quetchen and Myrtle Siskavich, because they pretty much took the books and made themselves a store. I wanted to save the people the cost of shipping up there, and they just take the books and sell them for me, and everybody keeps running to them for more books. But they're very interested in the history of the village, and you know, Rita's working hard at getting this museum going. Tony Schuster, another one, a great source, and Frenchie Siskavich, Myrtle's husband. We had in fact, I dedicated this book to them. It was quite a little, just imagine this, you know, well, Jill was the young one of the group, and then I was the next youngest. And we're sitting around the table with all these people who love to tell stories, and I have a list of about 200 questions. And I start out by asking, and then, you know, you get sidetracked, but tons of information. It's amazing. And if you go on for a whole hour where they just won't take a breath. They keep telling you more and more stories and get sidetracked. And then Myrtle was the one in the group who would finally, she had 13 children, snap everybody back. Larry needs answers to these questions. And really, we loved it. You know, it was our own little group, and we're still in touch with them all the time. I was just with Rita yesterday, actually.
So you've made some real fast friends
Oh,
up there,
Yes.
Yeah.
besides everything else.
And it's an important story, really. You know, it was the center of the county at one time. It looked like this is the county's future. It was Plattsburgh and Lion Mountain, but you know, Plattsburgh has the lake and easy access and everything, and Lion Mountain just had the mines.
You know, I've seen a lot of the early photographs of Lion Mountain, what it looked like in the 1800s, because, you know, photography, even though you didn't find photographs of many of these miners who were killed in the 1800s, photography was flourishing, and a lot of people took a lot of photographs of
yes.
Lion Mountain, and what a bustling community it was, and how tremendously different it looked than the way it looks now, with an awful lot of log buildings
They're
between
old.
Standish
Yes.
and Lion Mountain. A lot of those log buildings still exist now with houses built around them, so
That's
you
right.
can't tell. Some were moved. A lot of those mining houses, the row houses, are still there in Lion Mountain as you drive through, though, and
There's a
that's
photograph of those on our website.
Yeah, Jill has
Lion
it.
Mountain
That's one of
website.
the best photos on the site. It really brings it home. What was Company Town like? Look at the housing right on the main drag.
Yeah, and those houses look like they're strong enough, like the ones down in Witherby,
Mm-hmm.
to be there forever and ever and ever,
Yeah.
long past our lifetimes. All right, I need to know, have you written anything in this book?
No, he's the writer. I do the.
I mean, you're very careful to
photos.
say that, but I mean, do you proofread what he writes and say, hey,
I do
I
to a
don't
certain
like
extent,
that,
but
I
I'm
don't
usually
like
so
that
busy with-
paragraph, or, my wife proofreads everything I write. She's the first line defense on proofreading. Sentence structure and grammar and so on.
You know how hard it is to edit your own, but that's
It's very difficult. I don't,
Oh.
I mean,
It's a nightmare,
but
I do it.
I'm a unique and strange personality, so when I've written something, I don't even like to go back and look at it. I like to throw it on the table and have somebody else pick it apart. So I'm not very good at editing my own stuff. So you do that a little bit. But I want to know what besides being a constant support, you're
I
a
usually-
photographer.
I take photos when necessary. We get various photos from other people, and all sorts of conditions. Some of them look great to begin with, others need a lot of work to get them looking better and presentable for the book. They need to be sized a certain way, whatever size he needs to be able to fit into his format. So I do most of that. I retouch the pictures, resize them, get them all ready for him to put into the book.
It sounds to me like you both have become very proficient at the computer part of it. Thank God for computers. Right, putting a book together like this 50 years ago would have been unbelievable.
No, I couldn't do it. I mean, right now, we do everything. If somebody brings us the information, we do everything except printing and binding. We have someone else who does that for us. But as far as where, if you didn't like the way this looked, or these words, or any picture, or any of these separators that I put in the book, that was all done by me. So we're responsible for everything that's in every single book, no matter. And that's one of the hard parts about editing is when you know how it is when you read your own book. And I enjoy reading it because the stories, you know, I'm not saying they're mine, they come from other people, I'll put it that way. But the stories are interesting, but after a while you already know what you're going to read, and you might miss simple things. But when you
All the time.
Right, now when I send it to the printer, it's supposed to be perfect. And when the printer calls me, they'll send a blue line, and you have to review that, and you better find any mistakes in there, because generally the cost is $40 or $50 to change a letter or anything. So you better get it right.
Oh, baby!
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't
So-
be making too many mistakes after that.
If you find that you missed something, and I mean, you know, there's 60,000 words to edit, and you've read it so many times that you're just seeing ahead, and it's very difficult to edit your own. I know most publishers recommend you don't do that, and they're right. It's hard to do, is you have to do it many times, because you can miss something. Afterward, you look at it and you think, how could I possibly have missed that?
Self-publishing books is an unbelievable task. You know, ideally somebody writes something and you give the information to editors and publishers and proofreaders, and you know, the book is done. You've done most of it yourself, so you talk about a labor of love. You'd have to sell 50,000 copies of this book to, you know, when you consider the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure you don't count the hours you spend.
No, because you do it at odd times. You know, you do it whenever you can.
So it's not, you didn't write these books to become a millionaire.
No, I mean it's a nice way to make a living, but we're focusing locally to see what we can do as far as we made a profit off the first book, which has funded these other books that we've done, and that's what we were.
And that's amazing all by itself, considering the effort involved.
Right, and you know it comes back to computers, because like Dr. Everest told me a long time ago, you won't make money in local history. He said just do it because you love it.
Well, he ought to know.
But, yes, but it has changed somewhat now. You know, you can produce a book. I did it, the first one I did with Word, Microsoft Word, which I think I said last year was a terrible mistake. But at the time, we have no idea, all we had was Word. But now we have the actual publishing software that publishers use, so I can prepare a document. And right now we use a printer down in Rutland, and when I send material there, Larry Patton is the guy that handles it to prepare it for final publication, and he has told me several times, I don't touch your files. He said they're ready as we get them, and it's just a matter of making sure the pages are laid out in the correct order when they print and things like that. And you know, when I do find my own errors in the blue line, he's the one that helps me out to make the repairs. It can be very costly, like I said, so you want to get it right before you send it. And that's one of my jobs, is to get it right.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept for people who are thinking about writing. Everybody is a frustrated writer. Everybody'd like to write a book or put something together and see it in print. There's something really personally satisfying about this. But we have a friend whose name we've mentioned on this program. We've done interviews with her, Carol Sears Honig, who wrote a book and had a chance to get it published with a large publishing company, and opted to do it with another, what they call print-on-demand company called iUniverse, because the first company wanted to make massive changes. And, you know, none of us are so vain where we wouldn't give up a sentence or a paragraph, but there's a certain integrity in this book, and I don't want to get so philosophical here that people just get bored to death. But you've got a lot of time and energy in this thing. And if somebody said, no, I don't like this chapter, or this guy wasn't colorful enough, leave him out, then you would take some issue with that. So this
Well, that's
way,
why we decided to do it ourselves, because the various options that we looked at, for instance, Syracuse University Press, I think they have, 15 people or something look at your book.
I was working
And
through
they
them,
insist you
yes.
make the changes they suggest or they won't publish your book, and then they pretty much take all the money for it anyway. So you put all this time and effort and blood and sweat into this book, they change it all, they take all the money, and it's no longer your book. So
Well, Jill and I discussed this many times when we started the publishing company, because she found it hard to believe that it was true. But I've shown her over and over, you can look at contracts online that you sign with a publishing company. In the end, you expect to see somewhere between 50 cents and $1.50 per book. So the professor was right. You're not going to make any money. You know how many thousands of hours can go into that, and you're not going to see any money. But somebody else is seeing the money, and I would prefer to take the money and put it back into more projects like this. I do like to write, but I also like to publish. So, I would be considered a self-publisher because I published what I wrote, but I also will publish for other people. We have just done our first book for someone else.
Have you really? That's exciting.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well,
I didn't know that. Or is it something you want to talk about now, or you want to wait a little bit on that?
we can talk about it now.
Yeah.
It actually,
It's cool.
it was kind of my idea to begin with. My
Okay.
hometown is Whitehall, New York. It's at the southern end of Lake Champlain. And I knew, when I was a child, I wasn't really as interested in history as I am now, so I didn't pay that much attention.
Isn't
But
that the way?
back in 1977, when I was still just a tot, our then town historian had put together sort of a pictorial history of the town. And of course, like I said, when I was a kid, I really probably didn't even realize it. So he had wanted that book as a gift. And my mother went looking for it and realized the book is no longer available anywhere. They did a printing in 1977. They did a second printing in 81, and then they never had the funds to reprint it again. So I actually approached she used to be the town historian. She's now the Heritage Area Director in our town. Her name is Carol Greeno. And asked her, what are you doing about this book? Is there any way to make it available again? And she'd explained that they just didn't have the funds, and anyone they'd approached about it wanted to print too many copies. It would cost too much. So I said, well, my partner and I just started our own publishing company, and we'd like to take a crack at it. So we looked the book over and decided that it was a feasible project, and Larry worked out a contract and everything with them, because they didn't really have the funds to cover the whole cost, so we worked out a project with them where they paid us some up front, and then we share in the profits now as the book is selling. And they're actually going to make a profit out of it, because we're not a publisher who would just take all the money from the book, so we're both going to make a decent profit out of the project, and now the book is actually available again, and people can get excited about it. For the first time in almost 25 years, the book is available.
Isn't that cool? And you
Right.
didn't have to do any extra work on it, or did you?
Oh, I did a tremendous amount of work.
I was being
Well,
facetious.
if you want to take the two, we have the original book and the...
Oh, yeah,
and
let's take a look
no,
at it.
this is
That's the original.
This was what they call stitch bound. It was stapled, so just so you know, there are no staples holding it together. When you
We had to
open
take it apart in
It'll
order
still
to
stay
scan it.
together all right.
It's called Day Before Yesterday.
That's what the original looked like.
That was the second printing done in 1981.
Oh, it was.
Yes.
It looks
The
even
first-
older than that, doesn't
Well,
it?
the first printing, I believe, was pretty much the same, but it had a beige or yellowish cover. And this was the second print. There really weren't many changes or anything made between the first and second
Right,
printing.
it's just a
You have a copy of the original?
No.
Come on!
You can't get your hands on those, forget it.
Oh, maybe somebody has one who's
Well,
watching
I
this
don't wanna-
program.
We have something better. All right,
No.
and now that book it's kind of an odd size, but this is larger. We increased the size of the book to 8.5, actually a little bit more, 8.5 by 11, and
Yeah.
this is Jill's creation.
I did a new cover design to make it a little more attractive.
It's like having a child, isn't it?
Yeah.
Almost.
Well, I took some photos out of the book that wouldn't really, I think people will look at the cover and say, what, where did this come from? Because they won't really associate it with Whitehall. Like Whitehall was a very flourishing community at one time. They had the railroad, they had the canal.
That's right.
Yes, it was originally called Skeensboro. And today, things have gone kind of downhill, but you had a lot of prominent rich people living there back in the 1800s. I mean, they were rich enough to build castles for themselves.
What's
As their
missing?
homes.
What did I do here?
Oh, nothing,
That's
that was
just
just
a
a
page
page.
that wasn't cut good
Right,
enough.
we held that. That's going to be.
It's going to go to the research library at
research
Whitehall.
library.
So tell me what it took to get from there to here.
It took
Talk
a
about
lot of hours. What we had originally wanted to do was, we thought that we could simply take this book and say, scan in like a whole page, and then just make it a little larger. But as I started doing it, I realized it just wasn't going to work out right. So I ended up, there were over 300 photos in that book. I scanned in every single photo individually.
Come on.
And then, for instance,
With a flatbed scanner?
yes. And then, for
Oh, that's
instance,
just the
a
beginning.
photo like this,
Let's, yeah,
that's on page 54.
right here.
There were many photos that, they didn't have the technology to fix the photos back then, so they just put them in as they were.
And you can see the corner of the
So
photo.
you can see the corner, there's a big white chunk
There's a
missing.
chunk missing.
Yes.
Well,
So
Here's
with
what-
the software,
Oh, give me a break.
So she restored the photo.
Here's the
I took the
photograph
photo
down
and
here.
fixed it up so you never know that it was damaged. And there were many like that had tears in them, scratches, parts of the photo missing, so I had to sort of rebuild them.
And when
So
we
over 300 photos,
Oh.
that took quite a while. And my computer hard drive died in the middle of it. I had to run out and buy a new hard drive and install that. So that wasn't
You
very
just-
convenient.
Did it
No.
gas before it died? You probably overworked it.
Yeah,
the
probably.
original contract was to do it the way Jill said though, just to scan. There's a
Mm-hmm.
100 pages to scan each page and maybe add new covers and front and back matter. But we contracted for that, and within 3 days, she had changed it to at least four times the time.
I
Oh.
should have known.
Well, I
Oh,
wanted it to be.
Oh, golly.
I wanted it to look the way I
Right.
wanted it to look, and
But
it
you
was
see
going to
how
have
it
our
came
name
out.
on it, and I wanted it to be a really nice looking book for my town.
Now, we also increased, we enlarged the font. We chose a
I
different
noticed
font.
that, and
We
that's
enlarged it so
that's a
that-
great idea.
And the first book was not paginated either. I
Right.
wrote page numbers here to help keep track for myself while we were doing the book, but the original did not have page numbers, so we added that to make it easier for people.
Gotta have page numbers
Oh,
for,
and-
Yeah.
for reference.
And, you
There's
know,
no, you didn't put an
No,
index
this-
in though, did you?
no.
No, this is an interesting. This is just a model that's in the museum, but this man lived to be 134 years old. His name was Henry Francisco.
Now,
All
And he
right,
died
this,
in Whitehall.
it says believe it or not, so use
Well,
your own judgment,
They did an
folks.
article in 19
Down here.
In
he's-
1939,
he's
they
not
did
in
an
the
article.
original book.
in
I mean,
Ripley's
as
Believe It
far
or
as-
Not.
Right, that story's not in
Yes,
the
Larry
original.
found that the story from Ripley's. He found that by researching online.
And they do mention he was the oldest man ever to enlist in the military. In
He
the
was
US.
91 years old. He enlisted in the
Yeah.
American Army.
But he's a real man. You can search online and find relatives that have asked questions and know about his genealogy. So yeah, at first I thought it was a joke. 134 years old, but he died in Whitehall, but it's actually true.
He's quite a guy. His last child born when he was 82.
Yeah, he had 21 children altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And did you also realize, I don't know if you fish, but J.T. Buell, the famous spoon lure inventor, Whitehall. That's where he
Oh,
started
there's
his
a
business.
picture of the
Is she
source.
proud of her hometown or what here? So this was a heck of a project for you, and something that we talk about being these things being personally satisfying for you. This is
Exactly. There's a picture.
this
here.
is a crowning achievement for you, and I'm sure
Yeah, I
you
had a lot
made
of fun
the.
doing it too, and I learned some things about my town that I didn't know. And we're actually doing, I'm still working on it, it's going to take a long time, but as we mentioned, we did a website for Lion Mountain, and we're also doing a website for Whitehall, similar, with photos, historical information about the town and things like that.
I saw it go by when you turned
What's
it.
to be? This sounds not a very smart question, but what's to be gained by doing a website after you have a book like this?
Well, it helps the town. It gets people interested. Teaches people some things maybe they didn't know. And it helps us because it's part of our main domain, the way the web works, the more traffic you get to your domain, the better rankings we get in the search engines, and it's just better all around. So it helps us and it helps the town that we, Lion Mountain has been helped a great deal because people have gone online, they've read about the museum that they're trying to build, and they've actually contacted them saying they want to donate or they want to buy calendars and various things like that. So they've been getting a lot more attention up there. So I'm hoping to do something similar for my town where they'll get a lot more attention for their historical society and their various projects that they want to do around town.
Do you? Yeah, you found something here.
Well-
I can tell.
Well, one thing I did when I edited the book and I changed a lot of the captions. We went through with Jim Akins. He's the president of the
Aiken.
He's the president of the Historical Society of Whitehall, and with Carol Greeno, we went through with them all the captions and we edited them, changed them, fixed them. And when we enlarged the pictures, certain things came out. I love this whole book. There's so many great pictures. They have a mountain right inside their town with a beautiful building on it. But when I enlarged this one, I added it to the caption. But look what, this is something that I've never seen up here, but it's a pretty interesting sign.
It's 1874. I'll put my finger above it so Calvin can get it up a real good close-up of it. Why is that
It's just-
interesting to you?
It's just amazing that they would have a speed limit
It's just
for
funny, yeah.
people crossing a bridge.
A fine for crossing the bridge
Yeah.
faster than a walk.
You know, that's deja vu for me. We've seen something like that somewhere before in old photographs. And of course, I can't remember the reference, and I'm sure it wasn't this one, but $5 fine for crossing the bridge faster than a walk.
That was probably for the same reasons they try to limit
$5 was a lot of
skateboarding.
money back then,
Oh,
too.
yeah.
And I don't think you'd be going much faster than a walk. Somebody's standing there with a sled, is it?
Mm-hmm.
In the wintertime. These are wonderful photographs, especially for people who might have just moved into the area,
Yeah.
for those who've had families there for a long, long time. So you scanned every cut and pick.
Yeah, every photo's been enlarged, retouched. In fact, the Carol Greeno, when she looked at the new book, she was looking at it and said, was this photo in there? I don't recognize this photo because they're in here, you know, they're good photos and this is the best they could do in 1977, but they're kind of small. Some of them.
Is this Carol in the back?
No, that is Doris Morton. She was the town historian from, I think, around 1955 till 1988 when she died.
Oh,
She is the one who gathered all these photos
in
in
the
the
first
original
place.
book. Yes.
So-
So we wanted to kind of do a little dedication to her. So Carol was very good friends with Doris. So we obtained a photo of Doris. That's the actual photo from when she retired as a school teacher from Whitehall Central School. And Carol wrote the whole blurb on the back as a dedication to Doris. And not only was she the historian, as Carol pointed out in the back, you know, back then teachers weren't allowed to get married. If they got married, they were usually expected to quit their teaching jobs, and she didn't. So she sort of pioneered that in Whitehall. She got married and remained as a teacher, so other teachers started doing the same.
And you know what? Since we're all interested in history, all of us, Calvin behind the camera, although his face isn't always visible, and the three of us up here are very interested in history. Much of what we do is to perpetuate and preserve the history of the North Country. That pleases us. You don't have to be from Whitehall to enjoy this book. I want to make that abundantly
Oh, well,
clear.
anyone
If
in
you like
Champlain will-
history,
Oh, this is an education too. For
this
me.
is tremendous education that goes through this book, because most of us who are watching this program know somebody who's been to Whitehall.
And Whitehall was a big part of the American Revolution. It was the birthplace of the U.S. Navy. Anyone in Champlain? Well, there are names in Whitehall and Champlain that are the same because people were up and down the lake all the time. They built canal boats in Champlain, brought them down to Whitehall, and a lot of families relocated between the two places.
Right. A lot of people probably don't know this is where the canal system starts.
Of course.
And they are one of the #1 canal towns. Everybody knows what Whitehall is and what it was. And I really didn't know that much. I remember at St. Mary's learning about the Erie Canal and about the mules and everything being involved. But to actually, you have to look at it closely here to see, oh, there's the tow path. That's where the mules,
Oh, sure.
now, where they would tow the boats along. One thing I was fascinated by when they mentioned the change bridge, because as soon as you see something, you say, well, now I have to know, what is a change bridge? So one item I did add in there early in the book was they mentioned the change bridge, and I didn't know what it was, and then when I found it, I thought, it's a really neat idea. It looks pretty simple, but somebody had to think of this, say, back in Europe when they had canals before we did, where you would be hauling the boats down one side of the canal, and the change bridge is when the tow path, which is where the mules walk, the tow path changes sides on the canal. So now what you would have to do is unhook the mules and cross a bridge and get over there and rehook everything. It's very, very time consuming. A neat little system somebody develops. You're on the tow path, you go up on the bridge, and the path goes like this, and it loops back down under the bridge. So you can stay connected all the time, and they just circled around and continue on the left side or on the right side. And
Who would
It's
ever
just-
guess?
yeah, it's
Who
just
would
a-
even think about that?
maybe it's not that complex, but I thought it was a pretty neat idea.
I think
It
that's so
saved them-
cool.
Saved them so much time. And I was just, a lot of times when I saw these pictures, I had to ask, because I'm not from Whitehall, and I'm really not familiar with the canal. And Jill didn't mention, I don't think, that she lived right in front of the canal.
Oh, did you really?
Oh.
Right
Well,
near it?
my old
can find
apartment
a
is in
picture.
here, I believe.
Come on.
Unfortunately, it's getting ready to be torn down now because the historic district is just falling apart there. But
But when I looked at it, they have
I
a,
lived in this building here when I was a child.
All right, let's show where
And you can
the,
see the canal in front.
I'll get my index finger right near where you lived here on this side.
so the tankers that used to come to Plattsburgh Air Force Base, Jill saw these going right in front of her house all
I
the
could
time.
just sit in my window and watch the tugboat. I got to ride on a tugboat actually when I was. I don't remember exactly how old I was. I know I was younger than 8 because they rerouted Route 4 when I was 8, so it went away from the canal. But a friend of ours worked on the tugboats, and he let me come along one day. I got on down to Comstock and rode up to Lock 12 in Whitehall. And I remember going out and standing on that big tanker, the big flat tanker, and the cars were whizzing by on Route 4. And I just stood out there thinking, I'll bet they're so jealous. I am so cool standing on this tugboat. I'll never forget that as a little kid. It was just so awesome to be on that tugboat.
That's like being invited, for those of us who were enamored with steam engines, being invited up to take a ride on the steam engine. Occasionally that happened when we were youngsters.
Not children.
Tremendous
There
history.
is a picture of the beams supporting the billboards. It's interesting that the canal system is now part of the New York State thruway system. And I was going through this, and they're familiar with the canal, so they would say, well, it goes right there by the canal. And I'm saying, well, where's the canal? I don't see it. There would be some water in front of me, but that's Wood Creek. So the canal was actually right next to it. And I was trying to analyze what these two photos were, and then I realized when she told me the billboards, that was the backside. There's just like on the thruway where you would see billboards when you're driving, they had billboards along the canal. People are advertising, and
Come on.
yeah. So when you're cruising along, you get to see.
I know
all
it's in
these.
here, so.
There were billboards.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
along
just
it.
like you'd have along
There's a
the
picture
Well,
right-
they didn't face the canal, they faced the street, but as you were going up the canal, you could see all the beams, all the support beams for the billboards, and of course, I can't find it now.
Oh, that's perfectly all right, but I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that billboards. Yeah, we'll stop for a moment and maybe we can find it and come back. Once again, we just spent the last 15 minutes talking about very interesting subject matter, which may or may not get on tape. But here is the picture of the back of the billboards. All the woodwork, right, that would be the supports to the billboards. And on another page down here, on the bottom of this page, you'll see, what is it, Quaker Oats?
Yes.
So you can see actually what one of those billboards looks like. That is so cool, and thank you for finding that. Calvin pointed out, and it's something that dawned on us, we made only cursory mention of the connection between Valcour, Whitehall, Plattsburgh, the whole war situation, Revolutionary War period. Talk a little bit more about this, since this is your bailiwick, Jill.
Of course, at the time, Whitehall was still called Skenesborough, after Philip Skene, who had founded the settlement. He was actually off in Britain trying to get some more land from the king or something, I think, and the rebels captured Skenesborough, and I believe one of the first ships they captured was Philip Skene's schooner called the Catherine. It was named after his wife. And then they were instructed by Congress in the summer of 1776 to build a fleet, which then was taken by Benedict Arnold and used in the Battle of Plattsburgh.
No.
And I think
Battle of
that was-
Valcour.
I'm sorry, Battle of
Yeah.
Valcour.
We had a lot of battles going on here.
I believe there were 13 ships built in Whitehall Harbor in that summer, all of which were used in the Battle of Valcour. And then also, McDonough, I believe, lived in East Bay on the Confiance for a while, didn't he?
Yes.
The Confiance, which he had captured from the British, that was one of his prizes from the battle, and he actually lived in East Bay, right near Whitehall, for a month or so on the Confiance.
And as
then
many of
also
our
his-
viewers know, they found the anchor for the Confiance, brought it up and put it on display, and it's now in Plattsburgh City Hall.
And McDonough's flagship in the Battle of Plattsburgh was
Correct.
the USS Ticonderoga.
No, his flagship
The
was the
Saratoga was a flagship, but that
Oh, it
was
was just
one.
okay. Then the thing I was reading online last night is wrong, because I was
No.
trying to find some information on the USS Ticonderoga.
But the Ticonderoga is down in Whitehall right now.
Yes,
There's at least a
after-
hull for it.
Yes, after the war, they just kind of brought the ships to East Bay and just let them sit there, basically. And eventually they either sunk by themselves or they sunk them. And then in 1958, they raised the USS Ticonderoga, and they have the hull on display in the park in Whitehall.
So there's so many connections with not only with the canals, but with the battles. And Calvin mentioned the railroads, of course, from Rouse's Point all the way down. There are many, many connections down through the years. And Whitehall deserves a prominence that it hasn't always had in the history books, at least
Right.
in the modern history books. And you're filling in the gaps a little bit here. That
Trying
makes
to.
you very happy to do that. We have about a half an hour left in our program, and you have so many projects that you want to talk about. What else do you want to mention, Larry?
Well, this is a book that we came out with just a couple of months ago.
Oh, I like it. All right.
Well,
Tell me.
that cover was I told Jill I needed a cover, and she did something at first, but then I told her, I said, well, there's certain components I wanted on there, and within, I hate to say minutes, but it wasn't very long, that's what she came up with, and it's exactly what I was looking for. I wanted the two main combatants from the American side, and then the monument with the wording over it, and it came out just the way I wanted it to look. This is a different kind of book. It's I've read books about the Battle of Plattsburgh and about details, and it's amazing the research that some of the men have done, but the books, I think for the average reader, I think they just bog down because there's just so much minutia. There's so many small details that actually on several pages of some of the books I've read, the footnotes are bigger than the text, far larger than the text. And you can find that repeatedly. So
For academics, that's an essential thing. For the rest of it, it's
it-
just a distraction.
but it
really
yes,
is, you know.
It does make, yes, for the average person, say for me, I love to read books. That makes it less readable. And you know, I want to know the story, but I don't really want to know where everything came from. You can tell me, but tell me in the back maybe. Because it made it difficult to follow because you're reading a little bit on a page. So, and I really didn't know the entire story of the Battle of Plattsburgh. I just knew the basics that I think actually that's what most people know. So I started to dig into it, and I don't know, the idea came from what I used to do with my children. I'd make everything a game, and I wanted the kids to learn, but I think one of the big tricks is when they don't realize they're learning because they're having so much fun.
Of course, that's the
And
whole scheme.
Everything became like a trivia game, or when we're doing something, it'd be question and answers, and it was a conversational thing back and forth. So that's what I did here. It's done with numbered questions on the left side and a numbered answer on the right, so that if you want to, you can just sit here and ask somebody a question, but you don't see the answer. You know, most books would have it right there. You don't have to see it, so now you're also able to try to give your answer, and then the answer is right next to it on the right side. And I included all of the pre-battle material, the battle itself, and a lot of other details that I discovered that I haven't seen anywhere else. And I tried to add a little humor to it because it's conversational. It's like we would just shoot the breeze back and forth. So the questions might sound like you're talking to someone, and the answers sound the same way. But I discovered so many things I never knew about the Battle of Plattsburgh. I was just amazed. Just little details. Like if they mention Vermont helped us out. Well, helped us. We were all us, but they helped. But as I researched a little bit about the fight between Vermont and New York State, you find out that, well, not only I knew they were a country at one time, but they minted their own coins. I didn't know that. So I included that in there, and I included a picture of one of the coins, and I did things like that. Another thing I was absolutely fascinated by was, actually it came up in Whitehall, in the Whitehall book too, where they mentioned the prize fleet was kept down at Whitehall. And I've seen that many times, but what do they mean by the prize fleet? Was it the greatest fleet? Well, what it actually meant was the captured fleet.
Those were the prizes.
But there's much more to the story I didn't realize. I didn't realize that back then when, if you won a battle, there were the spoils of the battle. It didn't go to the government. It went to the people who won it. And I actually found numbers saying how much McDonough got for his victory and all the different officers, and I included all of that in there. And I was just amazed to find out that some of these men made over $100,000 back then. You were a
Big
wealthy
time.
man.
Oh, yeah.
Once you beat the British, you didn't have to do anything else. You could retire. Not that he did, but you certainly could. You were a wealthy man, and it was broken down among all of your crew. And I did break it down that way, but the lower men didn't get a lot. But $1,000 back then was also a lot of money.
Big time.
Yeah.
So this book took how long to put together?
Well, it's something. Some of the origins of this are with Dr. Everest, because when I first started writing, I was in touch with him. He helped edit some material for me, and we talked about the Plattsburgh situation, where he said this is such an important story, and nobody seems to know it up here. And he tried to rectify the situation. Like
We
many
played
people
that
have.
tune for 40-some years. And
But it is happening now.
Yeah,
and
it's finally happening.
and I said, well, I told him then, I said, well, a lot of it isn't that exciting to people, but I think that at least this concept, this you can also pick up, you can read, and you can put it down and come back later at a different point, and you can still follow what's going on by the questions and answers. And there were different, like when I open it here, when people say, well, they had 47 bateaux, well, so what's a bateau? So I do include that in the question and answer type
Let me
thing.
just show people what that format is that you've described to us, with the questions on one side and the answers on the other.
I think, it's like a game I played with my children, and like I said, there is some humor in there, some wisecracks here and there, but it is a serious book. There is, the entire story of the battle is there. You will get the details, and you'll get information. For instance, as I use the spreadsheet, I use that again here. I find that of McDonough's ships and McDonough's men, it was something that was just unusual to me. You can tie that into the attack at Pearl Harbor, that the names of 4 of McDonough's men were used to name ships, and 4 of his ships. All of those, out of thousands and thousands of Navy ships, those were at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. And I was shocked by it, so I researched it a little more. There was actually a 9th one that wasn't in port that day, but the rest were there, and some of them are very well-known ships.
Maybe with your Bloated Toe Publishing Company, you can come up with a board game that would sell very well during the commemoration of the Battle of Plattsburgh as we work toward that 200th anniversary in 2014.
I've actually looked at that as far as, and this was part of the idea.
Oh, I could almost see it on this table. Think about it.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I thought about the
We've got
Adirondacks, and
9
then
years
I
to work
started to
on
think
it.
more of this, because it's so important to our history. And there are things in here, like, I think when my local area tells me about the battle, well, there's a for instance. I at least make a suggestion in here that there's a famous story of the first shot that was fired was a good omen for the Americans. It hits McDonough's ship, and it breaks up the cage that was holding this rooster on there, one of the cockfighting hens they had. So I said, well, why would they have that on there? So during my research, I suddenly come to the realization, where's Thomas McDonough from? He's from Delaware. And Delaware in the Revolution, these men they became famous for, they had the fighting cocks with them all the time, and this was their entertainment. They would just watch these things fight and kill each other, and they became known as tenacious as the birds were. And I'd say there's a fair chance the reason McDonough had one on there is it wasn't discouraged among the men. It was very common. I mean, it is a famous part of our history, but I think it made its way into the War of 1812. And this does, like Jill mentions, this does branch out into the War of 1812. I will stray from the subject briefly with some questions and answers.
Well, it's all connected.
But there's so many things I didn't know. These 4 men. These 4 men that fought...
Let's show these 2 pages.
They fought in the Battle of Plattsburgh. Well, it didn't end there. They became admirals. These are very famous men. And what I did at the very end of the book is I took all of the men that I found that I thought had, I didn't know these men were this famous. So at the very end, on page 200, I mentioned Plattsburgh's overachievers, and these are, we had state senators, 4 admirals, heroes of 5 wars. All these men were there. It wasn't just a fluke, I think, that the Americans won. These were high achievers. These men didn't have any intention of losing. I mean, strategy played a big part in it.
There are fatalists who believe that if it was meant to be, it was going to be.
But, they went on to great success in life in other things, and it's amazing that I've never heard of a lot of these men, but I have now since I dug into it.
So this book is now available?
Yes, it is. I haven't really marketed it anywhere. We tried to put all our books together and have them ready towards the end of the year.
You've got a whole library on this table already. What else have you got?
Well, we have one that we don't actually have yet. It's coming out next week.
Never mind. We'll make believe it's available everywhere.
This is the cover of the book, although my name is not going to be that large. That was just a mock-up.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Come on, Larry.
And
That's
this is
more
actually
like
going to
this.
be
This is
it's going to be
again-
silver stamped.
Yes.
This here and
What does
the
that
frame.
mean?
This is
It's going to be sort of embossed and have like a silver foil, a little
Ooh.
fancier.
yes,
Ooh.
that is, there's, the glacial chapter has been redone. I used some information from Dr. Franzi at the college, and they have a working hypothesis, and I use that. I added dozens and dozens of photographs, more current photos of what Chasm Lake, the Dead Sea, and all the things up there look like. And Jill designed the cover, including this is the powerhouse at the Flat Rock, and the dam, and the Berry House that still stands in Altona. And this would be a shot of the Dead Sea. And that is the silver anniversary edition of the first book I did, which is this here. and that one's been sold out.
From modest beginnings.
Yes, there were home computers
This
were
is-
just invented back then, so I didn't have any access to how to.
You know, some of
put it
our
together.
viewers have no idea where Larry Gooley's been in the publishing business, and this is where you've been. So talk about this just momentarily here.
All right, that's the original book that I worked on back in the late 1970s, and I published it in 1980 through Denton Publications. There was no capability for self-publishing back then. As far as I was considered the publisher, but I did a lot of the editing work, but they had to do the final process, so they are considered the publishers of that book. But there's some great history in there, great photographs.
We
In
have
fact,
somebody who wants to add an
Oh, go ahead.
interjection
Well, I was going
here.
to say, as you mentioned, you didn't have computers back then. And since we have not mentioned her yet, I believe you
You got
had,
to talk about your
I
mother.
believe you had your
oh,
mother,
boy.
Anna Gooley, otherwise known
Yeah.
as Queenie.
Oh, boy.
She actually did all the typing for this book, since he did not have a
yes,
computer
I didn't
available to
mention
him at the
when I
time.
mentioned my dad.
Where does
earlier.
it say typed by Queenie? Where does it say that?
Well, that's Jill's pet
I don't believe you
name.
referred to her as Queenie in there, but
Oh, but
I
my
believe you
dad
have
is
a thank you to your mother in that
Do
book.
you
don't
really?
Yeah, my dad is Ronald Gooley, by the way. I mentioned earlier he worked there at Harris. Well, this new book is dedicated to my parents. But just to, so they knew ahead, I did offer the. Oh yeah, she's
I'm
mentioned
pretty sure
there
there's some.
about the acknowledgments, the typing. Oh, she did. She did a lot of work right at the last paragraph.
There we go.
There she is. She's mentioned in there. Okay. Just want to make sure we get her name on this program.
Anna
we did have
Gooley.
an 8x10 picture of
Because
her.
we
that
wanted to
we're
get a
gonna-
life-size photo of her, and there are hundreds of photos of Anna Gooley, because she used to pose all the time, but we weren't able to get an
But
enlargement.
it's nice. My parents are both in their 80s, but they really support what I do, and I know they were thrilled. Although I don't think it's that big a deal, but I did write a nice little one-page dedication to them and about how great they've been to the whole family, and that we all know how lucky we are to have our parents at this age and to have them be such great people. They really are nice people, and I wanted to make sure they saw it, and I told them that it is going in the book, which now will be out next week. But my mom is. I hate to describe her as a fan of mine, but she certainly supports what I do.
That's what mothers do best.
Well, that's how I got here. Have you talked to Calvin yet? She talks about Calvin more than she talks about me.
Oh,
so.
isn't that interesting?
But she's still a good mom. A great mom.
You know, you pointed out so many things. My head is just spinning at
so
40
am I.
miles an hour now, and that's wonderful. If by some chance, when you're watching this program, you can sense our enthusiasm for the North Country, the places we live, the people we know, the history that we cherish and espouse, then I think we've accomplished at least part of our mission. Getting together with people like you just inspires me more. Calvin and I both feel that way. Having done literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of similar programs, we're capturing slices of North Country history almost every day and every week through the eyes of those cameras that Calvin is behind on Hometown Cable. And it's a good thing. And we're at a point in our history where the technology is now accessible so that you can accomplish a lot more in a shorter period of time. And I wouldn't begin to try to minimalize what you've done, because just in the books on this table are literally thousands of hours of the proverbial blood, sweat, toil, and tears. But when it's done, and there's a cover on the book and a picture there and actually something inside the cover, then you've really, really done something. And it's personally satisfying, but it's also good to establish the historical continuity of the area. So you got to feel, both of you have to feel good. And even though you haven't said nearly as many words as this guy over here, we know that your contribution has been sizable. So you have to feel pretty good about it too.
I do.
Well, look, I did this cover, Out of the Darkness with the Gravestone, but Jill did all the others. And this is a great cover. It's simple, but that sells books. When people see it, they're just interested in what's this about Lion Mountain.
In each of those faces on the Lion Mountain book are 1,000 words. Some of the faces are relatively clean, some are horribly dirty,
And 4 of them died in mining accidents.
and 4 of them died in mining accidents, and the expressions in those eyes and on some of those craggy faces are Absolutely incredible.
You know, Jill she has a flair for doing this. The covers are great. And, you know, I'll write them and edit and format them, but Jill's also, she created the website, and, you know, we have a lot of visitors to the website. It's just unbelievable the friends we've made by email on the website, people that are interested in information on their families. I just had another one yesterday email me 4 times that she said she learned more from what I told her in 24 hours than she's had in the last 20 years from family members. And she's coming up to Line Mountain in Dannemora to get the records of her relatives. And this is the best part. Rita Question, Myrtle, Frenchie, Tony, people like that. You make really good friends. They're just
Forever
great.
and ever and ever and
Yeah,
ever,
they're
and
just
they'll
great
take
people.
that friendship to the grave.
Yeah.
Do you get some rather interesting academic queries from people who have never been to Lion Mountain, who discover your website and say, you know, can you send us a little bit more about the mining up there, who are trying to write, you know, do a larger treatise on mining in our country or in the world? Do you get responses like that?
Yeah, I've had several ask about how to do it, how you publish, and then about details about why did you choose Line Mountain and where did you get your information. You know, just about everything you can think of, people have asked. But
Because now we're part of that. I didn't mean to interrupt. But with the internet, we're part of a almost universal scheme of sharing information. And you were once again, you were modest in the beginning in saying you just want to make this kind of a local thing. Well, guess what? You've thrown it out for digestion from the rest of the world, and people from Australia are liable to pick up on Bloated Toe just because of the name itself.
yeah,
And discover you.
Altona, actually, I know when you search Altona, you'll find us, but you'll also find Altona, Germany, Altona, Australia. And, you know, we have a book that went to Switzerland, and we have, I don't know how many states, because Jill handles all the
We've shipped
invoices.
to California, Alaska, Florida, Virginia. We've shipped to many states.
Yes, most of the time it is someone who has a relative connected here, or New York State history, and they're just plain interested. And they, in fact, the first book I sold online of the book that Jill designed, the Whitehall book, that was in Stowe. There aren't many canals in Stowe, but
No.
someone, person interested in history, ordered right away.
Yeah, already, this has only been out for a couple of weeks, and already it's on its way to Virginia. I had someone from Alabama inquire last night as to a price for shipping and all that, so
The
we
con-
expect this to go.
Yeah, the contact with
over
all
as
these
well.
people is, I love it. And the fact that something is going to be preserved, like, I know these Line Mountain people love their story, but nobody told it. Now, actually, today we're shipping another package out to the New York State Museum, so their books, their story is now on record, and it's there. So
Do you have contact and automatic contact with libraries and universities and things like that, and schools where these books really might?
Well, I accumulated my own list. I would, what I call harvesting emails. I would go to a site and try to get the email address of someone in charge of acquisitions, because that is what a publisher is supposed to do. I don't have an automatic list, so I would create my own list. One thing I find really unfortunate is that most libraries are not interested in local history books. You would think that with, say, 500 libraries across the state, they're going to want to know about the Erie Canal or the Champlain Canal or all these things. And often what you get is, well, that's not really about us. And it is about us. It's New York State history. I ran into this locally. I won't mention, well, 2 of the libraries that I'm very familiar with, I've been to many, many times. Well, that book's not really about us. Is there anybody in our town that's in there? No. Well, then they're just not interested in it. That is unfortunate, because
Yeah.
this is our story right here. This is where our parents, our grandparents came from. And it's part of, it's not just Lion Mountain history, this is the history of New York State.
Oh, of course it is. Access is pretty simple to get to the website. Tell people how to do that.
If you go to our main site, bloatedtoe.com, you can go to our book listings from there. You can go to our Line Mountain website from there. We also put in a whole page of links that people can go to other sites that are related to information they might be interested in, just as a little helpful addition to the website for people who are searching for history on their towns and whatever else.
I also have, I could go get it. It's a list of the stores now where it's available. I don't know if you'd want that.
People
on
can
the-
find it, I'm sure, if they contact you through the website.
Yeah.
They can have all the access they need.
Yes, there's a contact us page on the website. They can fill out in the little form that will ship an email to us.
Sure.
There's also email addresses right there. They can just click on. That'll open up their email program and they can send an email.
I just want people to know that generally before we walk into a living room such as yours, and we appreciate the fact that you invited us here for a second time, that people, they scrounge about and clean it up a little bit, and we understand through the grapevine that your living room here was a lot like my river room at home, with stacks and stacks of projects and papers and photographs and emails and
Yeah, well, you can't really put them away either, because I think about the 9th stack to the right was what one woman emailed me about yesterday. And that information I haven't accessed in a long time, but it was there.
Isn't that
So,
amazing?
I-
Just to let people know that, when you have these works in progress,
Oh, they're all around the house.
they're all over the
Oh, yeah.
place.
As we told
and
you
they-
last time, we're not going to allow you into our computer room. That's,
I
Many
bring
stacks and
people
stacks
into
in
my
there.
river room, and my wife goes in the kitchen and hides. Even the dogs leave because, it's a nightmare.
Yes, or to
but
show
you
the
do know where
website,
everything is.
you can come in the room, we'll say, look at the screen, don't look
Yeah,
anywhere
don't
else.
look anywhere else.
But that doesn't.
But there's no way. It's the sign I used to have on my desk. I've got to get organized tomorrow.
Mhm.
'Cause you can't.
No, and you can't be
Now,
disorganized.
and Bloated Toe doesn't have a staff of thousands. We should mention
No.
that.
Just
This
two.
is what
is
you
it.
see, honey, is what you get right
Right.
here sitting at this
Right,
table.
we are a publishing company, but when it's time to ship out the books like we're shipping today, they didn't just jump into the packages.
No.
You have to create your own contract, learn how to write a contract. You have to buy all the packaging materials and make all your own labels, and then package everything properly, and then handle any customer problems or anything, which we haven't had any of, thank goodness.
And you, hopefully, programs like this and your in-store appearances and so on will generate more comments, more questions from people. Somebody's got to answer those emails. Do you try to get to everyone? Both of you or just you?
Oh, we both do.
Yeah. I try to do most of them because she's got too many things.
Do you
going.
get on it every day? So you try to keep
Oh, we
it up
check-
to
yeah.
date?
Oh,
Well, we
all
have it
day.
set up so that we set up our email so it actually leaves a copy of the email. Normally, when you download your email, it comes off the server and then you can't, once it's on your computer, that's it. We set it so it stays on the server so that we both access our email. It downloads to both of us.
Right. If I see it fresh now and she's not home yet, she'll see it fresh on hers.
Mm-hmm.
And my computer's on minimum 18 hours a day, every day. I mean, that's how I live. That's how you contact everyone, and that's how you compose the books and write everything. Everything is done on there. You make your labels on there. You have to order from different companies and find out. You have to learn all about tax, all kinds of things with New York State. In fact, we just started putting the books. This is the first time we've done this. Is we offer them in stores now, which we haven't done. We've had stores ask us, but again, Borders is very nice. They've contacted me a few times, but the standard is if your book is going to be sold through any big store, they want 40 to 60% off. So for this $20 book, they want it for $10. And if you paid $8 a copy to have it made, don't even consider all your expenses, you've got nothing. And that's what the big companies require. We offer something in between. Like Whitehall, on this book, normally they would make, like I said, about 50 cents to $1.50. Well, they didn't have enough money to publish it, but we worked out an agreement where if we sell 500 copies, they will clear over $3,000. Besides their investment, they will clear that, and that'll be in their coffers ready to purchase anything for their museum or for anything else that they need. In fact, they're redoing their roof on the museum. So this is something that now we're looking at getting more into this, so I'll probably have less time for writing. But I know what it feels like to have something that you would at least like, not saying a book is great, but you want it out there and not being able to do it. There's just no way that the companies will let you do it, but if you can produce your own books, then you can find a way to do it. There are ways. So like Jill said, we did a joint thing where we allowed them not to pay us the amount they should have paid us. Pay us a smaller amount, and now we'll share in the sales. And we are helping them with the sales. We actually, we set it up for them, and we went to Whitehall on November 10th to present the book to the public, and it actually turned out very well.
Yeah,
because
sold. It was a weekday afternoon, so you didn't, we weren't sure what we'd get for a turnout, but we actually sold like 23 or 24 books
and
on a Thursday afternoon, and then a lot of other people now, it's traveling around town, so people are buying, and we've sold quite a few on our website.
And books
So
that
far
tell
as
you how
well.
to do this will tell you that when you try to do a book signing, be prepared. Sometimes you will sell none, you might get two, you might have no people show. And we were there for 3 hours, and it was just a steady. It was a nice. It's a what do they call it?
It's a
Canal
coffee,
side
canal
coffee.
side coffee.
And you could sit at a separate table and just chat with people, and that's what I was doing while Jill was handling the transactions and visiting with people. And it really, it's a nice atmosphere. It's like going to Line Mountain. They asked me to go to a Line Mountain dinner. They set up a separate table where they can come and meet us and chat with us and purchase books, and it's a book signing and you have a good time doing it. But it's hard to make it work because a lot of times they tell you it doesn't work, and I dread it. We haven't had that happen yet. And the Whitehall thing actually went very, very well. And Jill actually
May you never.
well, they ran a picture in the newspaper with Jill holding the book up, and it's a thrill that now she's paying attention so much to history that she's the one behind getting this book done. It was just supposed to be a gift for me, and it wasn't there, and I had no idea at that point. A year later, we would be publishing that book, so I do have a copy now.
So where are we now? And you told me about all these projects that you're thinking about. Can you give us a clue as to what another major project might be so that we can come back here and do chapter 3 with Larry Gooley and Jill McKee?
Well, informal talks with a few villages about possibly doing something similar to the Whitehall book.
Ross's Point,
Yeah,
one example.
but that's just informal right now. If they're interested, we offer something a little bit different from most publishers. Again, because I know what it's like to go to a publisher and find out, like Syracuse University. That's who I was going to publish through. But the process is dragged out for a year, and if you already know what you want to say, like you present your column, you're not asking them to tear it apart and say it. This is what I think Gordy meant to say. And this is what I meant to say, and this is how I want it presented. And if somebody doesn't like it, I'll have to live with that. But I didn't want it changed a lot, and that's one reason.
Well,
We're
that's
also
yeah.
hoping to branch out into other areas, such as, now that I'm so experienced in retouching photos for books, I'm considering doing that as a business, helping people take some of their old photos and get them back into good condition to actually present them, and also possibly doing web design for other companies and individuals who would like a website.
There are programs that many people get already installed on their new computers that allow them to do more than we ever dreamed about 30 years ago with photographs. But there's a limit, as you said before. You can only go so far with some of those smaller programs. With bigger programs and with experience, you are in essence an artist yourself when you're dealing with those old photographs. And what you can do is amazing, especially once you digitize it.
Yep.
It's something we've talked about
Yeah.
before. When a magazine shows a fashion model on the front of the magazine, you know that people have been playing around
Oh, I'm
with
able to
that
do that.
picture.
I took a picture of myself once and had a little blemish, and I was able to get rid of it, and no one would know it was there. So
No more
it's
zits
really
and
not very
moles,
difficult.
right?
That's why all those models look like they have perfect skin.
Yeah.
And
Well, the expense is amazing too, though. When I first did the book, The Line Mountain Tragedy of a Mining Town, I did that in Word, which is free, like you said, with your computer. But then, as I discovered through the publisher that was aligning the book for me, well, the typical software for that is $1,500, and right away you're saying, well, boy, that's a lot of books I've got to sell just to buy the software and start all over, But that is really what you need to produce an entire book. To have someone say, well, I want this font, but I want it done this way, and I want all these pictures just dropped in with the text going around them or just underneath. You do need the powerful software. And what most of them use is something like Quark Express, which when I first looked into it, I didn't realize it was that expensive. And we purchased Adobe Creative Suite, which includes five components, right? And InDesign is the one that I'm
he uses
more familiar
InDesign
with. Jill's
to
familiar
design
with.
books, and then it has Photoshop, which is very good. I use Photoshop and PaintShop for restoring photos. They both have a lot of
It's
capabilities.
amazing.
Capabilities I'm not even totally familiar with yet. That's how powerful they are. And there's also a web authoring program on there which has all sorts of possibilities. But what I like about it is you can make your website with it just by using the components, but you can also go into the code if it does something you don't quite like. I'm familiar enough with the code now that I can go in and alter the code.
Are you
and
really?
make it
Oh,
do
wow.
exactly
I
what
admire
want it to do.
people
So-
like you. How about color? Have you thought about color?
Well, we
That
thought
adds
about
a
it.
tremendous
Well,
expense.
some of these, like this book, we wanted to use photographs. All the photographs were black and white, so there haven't been a lot of
Yeah, no,
opportunities.
no
for
problem there.
color,
You don't want to colorize
It's
the old
certainly when
photograph. No, you know what I mean.
certainly when there's
interesting.
a book that warrants it.
We just had this conversation, Jill and I did, just not long before you came here, because I said, well, look at, I have a display. I had to purchase corrugated displays. They're very nice looking, and the books are on tiers. And then when you look at it, you say, man, this is awful dark. Everything's dark, and this is the only one with any color. But that's what we looked at, and I told her, I said, we need to add some color. But I said, actually, when you look at each one, definitely didn't want color on this. This I wanted black and white with the sunlight coming over the gravestone. This is the story of the 1850s to the 1900s.
Yeah, I can understand all
And that's
that.
exactly
But
what
at
you said
some
is what we're
point in
looking at.
time-
Yeah, that's what
The
we're
only
saying.
other
The
alternative
project-
is, for instance, with that one we did the sepia
Yes,
tone, which was
I really
nice.
like
Yeah, I like the
That's a
sepia.
possibility also, but
Yeah.
we just went with the black
You
and
know
white
what?
for these two.
We just kicked 90 minutes right in the backside. And I don't know about our audience, but I hope we've conveyed some of our own enthusiasm about it. I want to thank both of you, Jill and Larry, for what you're doing. It's easy to get me cranked up about things like this, but it's really fantastic. I want to wish you the very best of everything. We're recording this 2 days before, 2 days before Thanksgiving in 2005. Wish you the best of the entire holiday season. I hope you enjoy great prosperity with your books in the future and your publishing company. And I'm quite sure that we'll be back for chapter 3 at some time in the future.
I hope so.
Thanks again to both of you. Thanks to Calvin for pushing the buttons and turning the camera around to get our best side, although that's difficult with me. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.